Your series this year for Advent is called The Advent Conspiracy. It's a series of texts, series of thoughts where we reconsider why we do Advent as a church and what more we can make out of it for ourselves as we prepare for Christmas. Today's theme is to worship fully. We worship all the time. We come expecting excitement. We come expecting anticipation of the Word. We come for hope and trust and sometimes even for sorrow. But we want worship to be full for us. We want what happens here this morning to be meaningful to us in a special way. A few weeks ago, I was out in Pennsylvania for the 225th anniversary of a congregation. I think I told you I was going the last time. And yes, I was not their first pastor. I confirmed that by the history book. But while I was out there, I asked several people at St. Michael's what experience from the era of the 70s when I was there was the most meaningful thing to them, if they could remember, in terms of worship. And I want you to think about that this morning. In your lifetime, what was maybe the most meaningful worship service or worship experience you've ever had? It takes time to think about it. But when I asked those people out there, they said, why, it was a Sunday in June, 1972. Does that mean anything to anyone? Okay. Well, I live in a little town called Klingerstown. It's about the size of New Rochester with a few more cats. And we had a visitor. The name is Agnes. A terrible storm hit the East Coast, just as one did recently, except it came far more inland. And in our little town in the mountains, down in the valley, we had 19 inches of rain in 2 days. Can you imagine what this would look like with 19 inches of rain? Well, the church is up on a hill, as they often are in Pennsylvania, and the parsonage was there too. And so as the water started coming up, so did the people, and brought along their cats and dogs and parakeets and things. And by the way, there's a special reason for the parakeets. It was a coal mining town. And in those days, the coal miners didn't have gadgets they have today, so somebody would always have a parakeet on top of their helmet. And if the parakeet stopped singing, they knew to get out of there as fast as they could, because the parakeet was far more sensitive to the gases than the human being would be. Anyway, so when they saved the parakeets, that was special. But they all kept coming up the hill and then bringing their cars up the hill. Well, eventually, we had water in the second floor of almost every house in town. Now, in floods, you expect water in the basement, maybe even a little in the first floor, as the East Coast has experienced now. But most of these people had taken their prizes, possessions, upstairs and put them in the second floor. That didn't help. All that was lost. We had a young couple. They were planning to get married on Saturday. In fact, they did. And all of their possessions in their second floor apartment, including all their furniture, was destroyed. That was the kind of place we were. But one of the beauties of it was, before night fell that Thursday, we knew that everyone in town was safe. And what a special thing that was, to know that no one was caught in an apartment or in a house or somewhere and couldn't get with us. A lot of things happened in those days that I won't share with you, except that by Friday morning, someone was able to get a truckload of cleaning supplies and a truckload of clothing into town, and we put it in the old Ford garage. Now, when you've had a flood like that, the one thing you can't find usually is cleaning supplies. Because how many pairs of gloves do your Kroger store have? So all of that stuff came in. And we had taken a rowboat to the grocery store to get things to eat for us, because you couldn't get into town before that. You ever look in a grocery store and see where the big stuff is? It was underwater. We couldn't use it. We opened more little cans of beans and stuff than you would ever believe. But everybody eventually went down to the old Ford garage and got clothing of some kind that they could wear, because the one thing they hadn't brought with them up the hill was their clothing. And I learned something special at that time. When there's clothing drives like that, when they send stuff to you, there's lots of stuff for people my age, and there's lots of stuff for little kids. But the teenagers got left out. There was nothing with a 24-inch waist. And it was amazing how the kids made do, cutting stuff off and using twine to hold up a pair of pants. And they found some bib overalls which fit just about anybody and so forth. But we made it through. Saturday night, we actually had the wedding. And they're still married. They had no clothing. They had nothing to go with but themselves. And the whole town came, dogs, cats, and parakeets. And we had a wedding together. But they all would say to me that Sunday morning service was the most meaningful service in their lifetime. Now, to tell you the truth, I can't remember much about it. I have no idea what the lessons were. I have no idea what I might have said in the sermon, because I sure didn't have any time to prepare it. But what happened that day was they had an opportunity to thank God that they were all safe, and that in spite of all that they had lost, not only just possessions, but pictures, and you know how that goes, that they were okay, and that with God's help, they could start over. It's an important theme to think about for Advent. Because we haven't had the experience like that, although some may have experienced floods or fires or whatever in their midst, or friends that have. But there should be a sense every Sunday we come together that we come bringing nothing but ourselves. And that we're thankful to be here. We're thankful that God has given us the opportunity to be in this place this morning and to share His Word and to pray and to sing and to talk about all the kinds of things we're doing to prepare. The author of the book, This Advent Conspiracy, is saying that in a time like this time of year, we really need to put things aside in our head that are sort of filling things up for us, and make a little more time for that which is really important, our worship experience. And it may be a worship experience not just here. It may be as we travel somewhere to thank God that God goes with us in our travels. As we're purchasing a gift for someone, to remember that we can be thankful that we have the opportunity to get that gift for someone, because we've been given the greatest gift that could ever been given to anyone. The child Jesus, not only the child Jesus, but the man on a cross who gave his life and died and rose again. That we have a reason to be here this morning to celebrate this Advent and His birth again this year and His life in our midst. One thing I do remember about that church service at St. Michael's was that the last hymn we sang that day, O God, our help in ages past, our hope for years to come, be Thou our guide while troubles last, and our eternal home. And to me, those are Advent words as we prepare for Christ's coming this year. We had the story of John the Baptist. Just this week I read that someone says that we should all pretend to be John the Baptist this time of year. One who was preparing people to meet Jesus. One who was going about calling people into repentance and new faith and renewal and baptism in the river and all these kinds of things. But he was doing this to prepare the people not for himself, but for the one who was coming soon, his own cousin, to be with them and to bring them salvation. We could pretend that we are the shepherds who leave someone with the sheep but come into town because we've heard the angelic choir sing. And we find Mary and Joseph and that babe in a manger, and can kneel down and give thanks to God. And so this Christmas Eve, we can do that too. In a special sense, reminding ourselves that we're coming here somewhere to come together and to give thanks to God for that wonderful little gift in a manger. And then right away, I would think of Mary and Joseph, the ones who cared for that little baby. One of the truths of humans is that if the day you were born, you were left alone, you wouldn't make it. You wouldn't be here. I don't think there's ever been a human baby 1 day old that all on their own survive to be our ages. We're here because someone cared for us in some way. And some of those stories might not be real exciting, but they still happened. And so this Advent, we give thanks for Mary and Joseph, not only for being with Jesus that day at the manger, but for raising him and obviously helping him to know the Scriptures. And then, of course, Mary at the cross, seeing her own son die on that cross for you and for me. And those kings that came from far distance, those magi. There were lots of kings they could have visited in that day that had money and power. Instead, they brought the gifts and knelt down and worshiped the Son, God's own Son, in that little town of Bethlehem. They had lots of other things they could do, but they found it important for themselves to follow that wisdom and to come and to offer their gifts for the gift that God had given them. To me, that's what Advent is about, of learning more and more each year to be thankful to God for the things that we have in the community and our faith and our churches, but also for that great gift of His Son that came to us that wonderful Christmas day. There's a wonderful old story that I love. It's the story of a little boy by the name of Jake. And Jake really wanted to be in the church Christmas program. Problem was, Jake had a speech impairment. And usually, whoever was doing the program decided that Jake would probably have one of those silent shepherd jobs. But Jake this year said to everyone, I want to say something. And so they worked it out that he would be the innkeeper. That when Joseph knocked on the door, he would open the door and say 4 words. Anybody know them? There is no room. And he practiced and he practiced and he practiced. And every time they would practice, Joseph would knock on the door, he would open it and say, there is no room. Well, the day for the program came. Joseph knocked on the door, and Mary had a pillow around her waist. And Jake opened the door and saw all those people. And tears came into his eyes. He said, "Oh, come on in. You can have my room." I love that story because, there are lots of things, folks, that could crowd into our hearts these days. And we might forget to make room for Jesus. But there is still that knock on the door. And in your own life, in your own way, you have privilege to say, "Oh, come on in, Lord. You can have my room. Be with me and my family, and be with my church, and be with us all, that truly Jesus might live amongst us these days." Amen.